So I am Colleen Rodriguez. I am the CEO of the LJD, Jewish Family Community Services, and thank you for being here tonight. It's important that we come together, that we have this conversation, that we continue to have these conversations. It's important that you know that when we built this building, we had Holocaust survivors come to us and say that there is not a Holocaust memorial on the East Coast between Miami and Atlanta. And that we really, as we continue to lose our survivors, that it's important that we have something, a place that we can come and have that dialogue and educate the next generation. So Morris Bennett is here tonight, and he's going to speak to you. He was that Holocaust survivor who came to me and said, yes, it makes perfect sense for you to put an art gallery in the middle of your nonprofit organization. And I said, of course it does. And here we are, however many years later. But the two promises we made to our survivors, and you being here tonight is helping us honor those promises. The first is that we will always have an exhibit in the Frisch Family Holocaust Gallery around equity and tolerance and acceptance, all long before those words became what they mean even today. And the second promise is that we would have the Chartrand Tolerance Center and that we would welcome groups to come together to share and to educate. Not be political, maybe not change your mind, but an opportunity to bring people together that wouldn't normally come together to have conversation, to have a safe space, and to learn from each other. What we're watching unfold in our world is scary, and if we can be a small part of healing and bringing people together and learning from each other and talking about what we need to do, words are wonderful. But words are just words, and it's time for us to take action. But what does that mean, and what do we do? We've had several powerful exhibits, and before today, I would have told you that The Rescuers, which was the exhibit around the non-Jews that rescued Jews, was the most powerful exhibit we've had, and I thought we would have, that would be the one. But I'm going to tell you, I think tonight, this exhibit is actually the most powerful exhibit that we've had, and maybe will be the one that's the most powerful for years to come. We always are talking about, learn about history. We don't want history to repeat itself, but I'm okay if the history in this story and this exhibit that you see tonight repeats itself over and over again. And quite frankly, having you in this room together, it is repeating itself. We want to make sure that the communities can come together, feel safe together, because when people are attacking, it feels like they are the majority, but they really are the minority. So how do we bring groups together that wouldn't normally come together to say, we're not going to tolerate that here, and we're standing together? And tonight's just one small piece of that. I applaud the JCA, I applaud the YMCA for doing this initiative, for stepping out, for having these conversations, sometimes uncomfortable, and really working in partnership to say Jacksonville is not going to accept the tolerance of this hate behavior. So again, thank you for being here. I have the privilege of introducing my partner, my friend, Adam Chaskin, who is the CEO of the JCA. He was the one who spearheaded this, had the vision for this, sought out the funding for this, and said, you know what, we too have to have a role in changing our community and healing our community. So it's my honor and my privilege to introduce Adam Chaskin.
So good evening, and thank you so much for all of you being here tonight. Our thanks is to the LJD, Jewish Family and Community Services, for hosting our event tonight. And as Colleen so eloquently in her speaking but introduced, I am Adam Chaskin, the CEO of the Jewish Community Alliance, and it brings me a great amount of pride to be here with you as we kick off Together Against Hate, promoting unity in our community. This initiative began at the vigil following the anti-Semitic incident at the Florida-Georgia football game when I bumped into Eric Mann, the CEO of the Y, and said, we've got to do something. You know, we can't let this stuff keep fermenting. And then a few weeks later, a few phone calls between us, get our staffs together, to brainstorm, because Eric and I both know our staffs are the key to any success in designing incredible programs. And the result was this series. It's our belief that most of the forms of hate and bigotry that we see in our community are lack of education. People grow up in a certain area. They might never have exposure to a certain religion, a certain race. If they heard anything negative, they have no reason to think differently because they were never exposed to that. It's about education. The fact that we're starting here tonight with the exhibit they have going on, and that the next several months we'll have programs moving around the community so that more people in the different geographic regions of this very large city can participate. And we'll focus on the different forms of hate, because unfortunately there's quite a many of them. And as we move this program along, culminating in February with the Race Against Hate, the 5K run walk. Walk was added for me, so anyone else? so that hopefully we'll have thousands of people who can by just participating, help spread the message that, this community and what it really believes, and those hateful messages are not appropriate here. So I want to, again, thank everyone who put this together, and for you participating here. I also have to thank, of course, some funders. So CSX, the Jewish Federation Foundation of Northeast Florida, and Team Up Project, a national collaboration between Catholic Charities USA, Habitat for Humanity International, Interfaith America, and the YMCA of USA, and by many local organizations who have agreed to partner with us to make these events happen. The Together Against Hate initiative has come to life. On behalf of the JCA and the YMCA teams, I would like to thank LJD, Jewish Family Community Services, 904 Forward, JASMYN, the Arc Jacksonville, OneJax, and the Interfaith Center of Northeast Florida, who are playing a leading role at the first ever Together Against Hate series in Jacksonville. I would also like to thank the City of Jacksonville and our new mayor, Donna Deegan, who has issued her support of Together Against Hate. The mayor couldn't be here with us tonight. However, she has sent a proclamation about our series, which I'm honored to share with you now. Whereas anti-Semitic incidents in the United States rose 36% in 2022, according to an annual audit conducted by the Anti-Defamation League, and whereas the City of Jacksonville has been the subject of a series of anti-Semitic and hateful instances in recent years, whereas in response to this, the Jewish Community Alliance and the First Coast YMCA have partnered to launch Together Against Hate, promoting unity in the community, and whereas beginning September 14th, 2023, and running through February 25th, 2024, this partnership will include a series of community conversations and events aimed at promoting unity and addressing topics of prejudice against people of different faiths, genders, races, ethnicities, sexual orientations, gender identities, and abilities. And whereas the series will culminate in a Race Against Hate 5K run walk at the Winston Family YMCA on Sunday, February 25th, 2024 at 1 p.m., and whereas the City of Jacksonville recognizes the need for unity, open dialogue, and efforts to see each other's humanity in order to curb instances of anti-Semitism and intolerance in the community. Now, therefore, I, Donna Deegan, by virtue of the authority vested in me as Mayor of Jacksonville, Florida, do hereby proclaim September 14th, 2023 as Together Against Hate Day in Jacksonville, and encourage all citizens to reach out across our differences, take part in respectful discussions, and join together to stand against hate in the community. So thank you again for being here with us. Without further delay, I would like to introduce our moderator of tonight's event, Hope McGrath, the curator also of the First Family Holocaust Memorial Gallery. Hope, thank you.
Thank you. It really is an honor to be in this space with all of you tonight. You've already heard some really wise people say how important it is that we gather. And I want to right up front make sure that we resist the temptation to say, yeah, but we're probably in this room speaking to the choir. Because I actually believe the choir also needs to be fed. And we don't know everything we need to know, ever. We will never be done learning about how we move through this world with the other members of our human family. So it really does matter that every single one of you is here. We're thrilled. in just a couple minutes, I'm going to pull up to the front some people much smarter than me. So my voice will get very limited very soon, which is good for all of us in the room. But I do want to provide first a couple housekeeping items and then a little bit of context for the night. From a housekeeping standpoint, I do want everybody to be aware that we are being recorded. That recording is going to be available to everybody who is here. It will be sent out early next week, along with some very specific resources that I and the speakers and others are going to put together as a follow-up to tonight's conversation. Also want to make sure, because I believe, everybody needs to be able to take care of themselves and others when we're in space together. So the restrooms are right down the hallway when you go out the door here. They're both on the right-hand side. Take that bio break whenever you need to, right? And if you're sitting and you find you need to get up and stretch around and move your body, please do, as we're spending this time together tonight. Colleen already covered the fact that the lights were out, and we really do mean it. It's going to be very dark out there. So wait until somebody can put on their flashlight on their phone and get you to where you need to be. Questions. So the way when we slip into our question and answer period for the evening, JCA and YMCA has asked, they have provided cards for you to write down any questions that you have. I encourage you to keep that close so that as you are listening to the speakers, as you're feeling certain things, as you're learning certain things, as you want to question certain things, to write that down on that card. And there will be 2 times a little bit later that I will ask you to pass them towards the aisle. And we have some volunteers here who will scoop those up so that we can use those questions when we go into the question and answer period. I think that's the housekeeping we need to do, but we're pretty loose around here. So if anything else comes up, just let me know. Before we jump into content, how we want to spend this time together, the way we are going to be together matters. And it really involves all of us to be able to create that gracious space. My friend Rudy Jameson, who you're going to hear from later, will say, gracious space isn't enough. The goal is actually just space. And he is right about that. But we're going to take a baby step, right? Instead of leaping into just space. But with gracious space, what that really means is that we all want to be able to create the conditions so that we ourselves can be vulnerable, so that we can be open to learning and listening to other people's stories, where we're willing to be a little bit messy together, right? So part of gracious space is the setting, right? Are we creating the right setting where we can all take care of ourselves and each other, where we can be vulnerable, where we feel welcome? And my hope is that this physical setting is providing some of that, but some of that will also come simply on how we're sort of interacting with each other in the space. One of the other important elements of gracious space is the spirit that we bring into the space, right? Like the spirit of love, courage, right? Again, that sense of vulnerability. And I think that idea of spirit is something that we all should linger on when we are moving into spaces throughout community, because we are the ones that bring that in the door, right? And so it's important for us to be sort of conscious of that. The last 2 parts of gracious space, which are my favorite, the next one is learning in public. So think about that. What does that look like when we're learning in public? It means being honest and authentic. It means sometimes stepping into being uncomfortable. It means deep listening to other people. And it means when you're sort of sharing in that learning, it also means we're sharing power, which can be really important and really beautiful. And then the last section is inviting the stranger. When I say that phrase, inviting the stranger, single words or phrases from you, what do you think that means? Somebody pop something up. What is inviting the stranger? Stories. Beautiful, right? The sharing of stories. What else does it mean? Hospitality, right? Say it again. Dialogue, right? It's not just physically being in space together, but we need to be connecting to one another, right? What else does it mean to invite the stranger? Ooh, yes, right? Yes, we have to be curious about one another and actually more deeply curious about who we are, right? What else? Being open, beautiful. What else? Tolerance. And some people will say, and I tend to be one of those people that kind of agree, tolerance maybe isn't enough, right? Is our goal to tolerate one another? Or is it to love and understand, right? And that's a little bit different. It might feel nuanced, but maybe that nuance matters. But I'm glad you brought it up. Compassion. Empathy. And is the stranger always a person? What else is a stranger? Thought, an idea, feelings, experiences that are very different than our own. So is everybody good that we're going to build a gracious space here together tonight? All right, all right. And you'll keep us honest on that as well. So I'm going to provide just a little bit of context for this evening, because when the folks come up here to start talking about their work, I want to make sure that we have called into this space some of the hardest things we're going to be grappling with. And I ask you that when you begin to feel uncomfortable about anything you're hearing or seeing, that you invite that you sit with it, that you be okay with it. Because you are amongst people that are ready to hold that space with you, all right? So when we are having this conversation, and tonight's conversation on hate will have a very tight focus on racism, but not only racism, because the fact is this is all intersectional, right? And so when we are talking about hate, it is important that we recognize that it impacts everyone, but its primary impacts are on people that are not in the dominant group. We are going to be looking at this through a lens of this nation, primarily, and of this community. So when we are talking about hate, we are talking about the kinds of impacts that are sort of pressed upon actually the majority of people, simply because they are different than that majority group. So yes, we are talking about anti-Blackness. We are talking about anti-Semitism or Jewish hate. We are talking about forces that are working sort of overtime against our LGBTQ community and neighbors. We are talking about anti-Asian hate. We are talking about hate that is wielded against immigrant communities. And we are going to be talking not just about the people that are the targets of it, but that there are individuals and groups and highly organized groups of individuals that are wielding this hate, not just in places far away from us, but right here in our own community. And we're going to talk about the fact that hate plays out person to person at times, but it also plays out in family, neighborhood, community, and in systems. And depending on who's going to be talking up here tonight at any given moment, some people may put an emphasis on what we do as individuals. Others might focus on what we do from a systemic standpoint. Probably all of us will argue that we have to do all of it, right? We have to do our own work, we have to do work with one another, and we have to tackle these systems that actually support and allow this to happen, right? So we're going to be talking a little bit about all that, though we're going to be going a little bit deeper into racism, into anti-Blackness. And we can't do that without at least for a moment recognizing that the history of that is as deep and as long as the history of this country from the first moment that the colonizers stepped on the land. When indigenous people were displaced and vilified for who they were, and that immediately we started a process in which 12 million people would be stolen from their land and brought to the United States and other places in bondage to be the labor to build this country. So when we talk about anti-Blackness, we have to recognize the legacy of slavery in this country. We have to recognize that though there were laws that made that illegal, it just kept evolving. It evolved into Jim Crow laws. It evolved into systems of segregation. It evolved into a time of racial terror lynching. It evolved into a period now of mass incarceration and incredible brutality against our Black brothers and sisters. So we have to hold that, right? As we talk about solutions for this moment, we have to recognize that we are all trying to rip out roots that are super deep into this ground. And I don't say that to make it feel daunting to us, because it is all daunting, right? But we must tear away at that. And there's always been people tearing away at it, right? So we can also learn from the people who resisted previously. Probably for a lot of you, if I were to say, what is the ultimate moment of hate in our history? Probably a lot of us would call up the Holocaust. A time in which over just a very few years, barely over 10 years, that 6 million Jewish people were murdered by the Nazi regime and their allies, and another 6 million murdered for who they were, be they Black, queer, politically different, disabled, right? And this is important for us to call up in this space, especially because we are in this space. We are at JFCS. We've spent time in the Frisch Family Holocaust Memorial Gallery tonight, and so it's really important that we recognize that this history is also very much a living history with us. This isn't something from a long time ago. This is still moving amongst us. We will not, tonight or at any time, draw false equivalencies between the lived experiences of any group of people. But we will call out that there are sometimes commonalities in the things that create the conditions in which hate can flourish and the ways that people resist, right? Because there are lessons to learn across groups. And in this particular case, we have a clear example of when one form of hate is in place and allowed to take root, that others will sometimes learn the darkest lessons from that. And we know for a fact that the Nazis in the early 1930s, late 1920s, were studying what our country was doing. When they were trying to figure out a final solution for the extermination of the Jewish people, they said, who else is able to do this? I mean, how does the population allow this to happen? What are the laws that need to be in place to make this happen? And they looked to the Jim Crow South in the United States as a model. So those histories are inextricably bound, whether we want them to be or not. They are. And lest we think this is something that is far away from us or only in history, these are just a few reminders from our community. Every one of these pictures is from Jacksonville. Confederate flags in front of Duval County Public Schools only a year ago. A swastika projected on the side of a downtown building to create terror amongst the citizens. The Proud Boys and their strong presence in our community. Oh, because they are here. People throwing up banners that are both targeting the gay community and the Jewish community at the same time. And children walking out into their driveways and picking up flyers that are in little plastic baggies filled with rice. Some of you have found these in your driveways. And depending on the season, those flyers are either anti-Black, anti-gay, or anti-Jewish. And in some cases, all of that. We have to care about all of this. And the good news is we have the ability to resist all of that. And yet we still are reminded about the presence of hate when only 3 weeks ago, 3 of our neighbors were shot simply because they were Black. They were shot by a young man who with intention went to the blackest community he could find. That matters, and it needs to matter to all of us. Whether that happened on our block, whether it happened on a side of town that we've never even been to, it still matters to all of us. You're going to hear more about this later, but hate is alive and well, but so are models of resistance. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about the show because I want you to see the show. But there are these moments in history that we all need to look to in which somebody says, I am being targeted. I need people to show up for me. And people show up. When Martin Luther King wrote a letter from his jail cell in St. Augustine to his friend, Rabbi Dressner, and said, I need you here. And I don't just need you. I need you to bring some of your friends. Like, I need a whole bunch of rabbis here. 16 rabbis and one layperson showed up. And they showed up in a powerful moment of solidarity. And the letter that they wrote about why they came and why it mattered is probably one of the most important documents of solidarity, I would argue, in American history. And it's one of the least known. I wonder why. Because there are people trying to protect certain things by keeping us apart from one another. But there are signs always of hope, of people who feel these losses and want to do something about them. People who put those losses into action. And sometimes action starts, and it must start with grieving. And it needs to start with grieving together. That these aren't just individual losses. These are the losses of our community, right? It is about us seeing one another, about holding space for one another. It's also about policy, right? How do we protect each other through the legal frameworks that are available to us? And then when one of us is harmed, what are we doing to care for that person? And maybe we should also be asking the question, are we doing anything to care for the perpetrator? Or to at least understand the conditions in which that person rose up to hate? Because we all have to play a role in that too. So I'm going to invite some very dear friends, some very fierce people to come forward to be on the panel. Morris Bendit, if you will please come up, our good friend Morris, Dr. Kimberly Allen, Claire Goforth, Dr. Rudy Jameson. Give them a second to put their mics on. That was intense, so here's what we're going to do. I need you to unclench your jaw, because I know it's clenched. And I need you to lower your shoulders. Like sit in that chair in the way you're supposed, that it was made for you to sit in it. And we're going to take a couple of really deep breaths together, right? Just to sort of ground ourselves in the space as we're looking at these beautiful people up here. So big breaths through the nose. Make it loud out of the mouth. In through the nose. Out through the mouth. Hey, y'all. So we are going to start by having you all introduce yourselves to the audience in the way that you want to introduce yourselves instead of me reading your brilliant and extensive bios. Yeah, so why don't we start with that? Morris, will you start?
My name is Morris Bendit. I'm a Holocaust survivor. Two-thirds of my family, immediate family, were murdered and died. So I think this evening is very important to bring out what happened and what we should do, hopefully, shouldn't happen again.
Thank you, Morris. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Appreciate you. Dr. Allen?
Good evening, everybody. I'm Kim Allen. I am first the wife and mother, Jacksonville native, of a gorgeous Black family. And I am also the CEO of an organization called 90 Forward, which is a racial equity organization here in Jacksonville. So approaching this work from the personal as well as the professional, but the personal always comes first.
Thank you. Thanks for being here. And my fierce friend, Claire Goforth.
I'm Claire Goforth. I'm a journalist, formerly the editor of Folio Weekly, where you may have seen my work. Since 2019, I've worked for a company called The Daily Dot, and during that time, I have specialized in reporting on hate and extremism and the related subject of conspiracy theories. And so I'm here to provide what insight I can from that work, and I'm really grateful to be here and grateful for your attention and time.
I told Claire earlier, I was like, it's got to be something to be referred to as an expert on hate. Well, it's important, right? That we have somebody who really understands that. So we're grateful that you're here. Thank you, Claire. And my good friend, Dr. Rudy Jameson.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Rudy Jameson. I am a native of Jacksonville, Florida, out east to be exact. I currently serve as the executive director of the Human Rights Commission for the city of Jacksonville, and I have the privilege and the pleasure of having a career where I get to engage in work that is not what I do, but it is who I am.
Thank you for that reminder about purpose, right? About purpose. So the first question I want to ask you all, and I appreciated, Kim, Dr. Allen, that you said that it is both professional and personal for you, but the personal is always first. And I think with all of us, no matter what else is going on in the world around us, that personal lens is the one that we tend to filter things through most fully and most intentionally. So this question you can answer either from a personal or professional space, whichever one feels most comfortable for you. But the question is, how has your life experience intersected with hate? Like, what has that looked like for you? You can give a specific story or more broadly. And whoever wants to start first, I don't know if you're comfortable starting first, Morris.
It's okay.
Are you good starting? Okay, we're gonna let Morris take us there.
The reason it is lately, especially lately, you can see a bigger uprise of anti-Semitism. Now, what is it, 30-somewhat% since above? Now, it's not, I don't mean just the ones like the Nazis, but they were collaborators too. And the worst part of that was the rest of the citizens, they were looking away. Mm. They didn't do anything to help out. They locked their doors, as a matter of fact, for somebody who tried to escape, to hide. That means silence can be a killer. Mm. And that's what happened, really. I assume if the ones that were silent, if they would raise up, I don't think it would happen that far. So beside the collaborators and the Nazis, of course, silence was the killer too.
Hey, Morris, I'm going to ask a follow-up with you, and that is, in your introduction, you reminded us or shared with people who don't know your story that about 3/4 of your family, two-thirds of your family were murdered during the Holocaust. Those losses are huge and unbearable, and for most of us in this room, completely unthinkable to lose aunts, uncles, cousins, grandparents,
and father.
and father, and you have lived a beautiful, fruitful, long life, but you have continued to have to carry those losses. Can you speak a little bit to that? Like, because I think it speaks to the ripple effect, right? There's what happens in that moment of hate, or moments of hate in the case of your family, but what the longer term effects are of that.
Well, you cannot dwell on something you cannot help. It happened, so you're trying the best to make sure that it doesn't affect you for the rest of your life. You want to remember, and you want everybody else to remember what happened and how it happened. So I tried to, well, I started off as a small child. I tried to build my life as normal without being bitter about what happened. I was upset, but not bitter. Some people will ask me, can you forgive the Nazis or anything like that? And I said, no, I personally cannot forgive after killing 2/3 of my family. But you must, well, I learned from the hard way. You got to continue trying to build up a life ahead of you. Thank God I do have a nice family. And but you cannot forget, and you cannot let it forget, because especially lately, with that big anti-Semitism that goes on, remember, history repeats itself. We cannot look away and not do something about it to stop it.
Thank you. And we're going to hear more about the good works that you've been doing in a little bit. So, Dr. Allen, what does that look? Ooh, I know that is a big question. I mean, because you live it, you see it, you witness it.
Yeah. Hate has looked a lot of ways across history, and certainly recently. And I believe the last time we were here and we were defining what it was, and it's really intentional. There's the intention to disrupt the livelihood of whoever the hate is projected upon. But then there's the ripple effect, right? There's the ripple effect across generations, across the nation. And here in Jacksonville, hate has looked like the projections on the buildings. And it's looked like our 3 neighbors being murdered because they're Black. But hate is also very subtle. And it has a way of sneaking into our lives without us even realizing it, because it's easy for us to say, I would never go and shoot 3 people I didn't like, right? Because that's the overt, that's the grotesque,
The sort of extreme kind of example.
Extreme. But hate is also devaluing someone's life to the point where you think it's your right or even your power to determine their destiny. And that can look like trying to ruin someone's reputation, right? That can look like spreading rumors about people that you don't even know. That can look like trying to control how other people view a person without getting to know them for themselves. And it's those what seem like insignificant or small or gossipy sorts of moments that lead up to and build up to this animosity towards folks, towards groups of people. And it can lead to the extremes of genocide, or it can disrupt generations. And personally, the professional side of seeing Angela and AJ and Gerald murdered, hearing about their stories, hate looks like personally me getting a call from Rudy on Sunday saying, hey, I need you to meet me here at this building. We need to strategize how we're going to respond. And my 10-year-old son crying because he's worried about my safety leaving the house. Oof. So hate can certainly be the physical, right, harm of people, but it is also the psychological trauma that we impose on people and families who don't even live in the area, but are afraid to go to the store now because this happened here. And so that's what it's like.
Yeah, you said a lot of truth there, right? I mean, I think it's important because sometimes we think hate is still wearing a white hood and a robe, right? I think it's at the museum in Montgomery. There's a quote, I think by Ida B. Wells, that says, I may be wrong on that, maybe it's not Ida B. Wells, but I think it is. It says it just, the hood and the robe turned into, in some cases, a black robe, right? The black robe of a judge, right? That these things sort of evolve and that it becomes more insidious. It's not always that overt violence. Like a lot of those images I showed you, you'd probably be like, I would never do that. We hear it all the time in the Holocaust gallery here where people will say, oh, this is just terrible. I can't imagine anybody ever doing that. And I'm like, I think we need to check ourselves when we say that. Because the Holocaust wasn't just, people didn't just wake up one day and all of a sudden people were being sent to extermination camps. They were first devalued. They were identified. They were segregated. Their businesses were attacked. Their children were told they were no good, right? Neighbors were turned against neighbors long before genocide came to be. And we've seen the same thing with other communities where it often starts in this kind of small way, kind of the drip, drip, drip of trauma and of myths and stories and lies about people that then start to take hold because rhetoric and words are powerful. Sometimes that is the first stepping stone to some of the violence that we see. Yeah, thank you. Claire, you're seeing a lot, doing what you're doing. Like, what does hate look like through your lenses?
Through my lens, it's such a big lens, I have to say. As a journalist, I experience it one way. As a white woman who was raised Christian, hate was not something that I walked through the world experiencing. I had the privilege to live a life without that. In 2016 was the first time that I was threatened by a neo-Nazi. Since then, I have been threatened. I've been doxxed. I have a police officer's phone number on speed dial. I've paid a lot of money to scrub my information from the internet so that they can't find my home. I've taken a lot of precautions in that way. So my experience from hate has been just because I'm a lens that looks at it and says, look at this, I see it, here it is. But when I was listening to Maura's talk about murder specifically and losing a loved one to murder, it reminded me one of the things that I see, and that if you do research in this space, you will find that there's a really consistent pattern of sexism, domestic violence, misogynism throughout the people who espouse this type of hateful rhetoric. And I have lost a loved one, my best friend too, domestic violence, to murder. And he was not in a hate group, so I don't mean to please don't misunderstand that. But these people that are in these hate groups, you will find a lot of commonality with that level of, that feeling that, like you said, Hope, the privilege to take someone's life, that you have the right to do so. Because while they try to sanitize their beliefs, they are very intentional about that in some cases, in my experience as a journalist. At the end of the day, they do want to eradicate the people they hate. I mean, that's just a fact. So I guess that's how I experience hate.
And can you say a little bit, I mean, I know it's a lot, but can you give us a glimpse? Because a lot of people say, and people aren't going to maybe like that I'm saying this, a lot of people say after a crisis or a trauma in our community, and in any community, but this isn't us. This isn't who we are. This isn't Jacksonville. But it is, and it has been. But you actually know. So can you give us just a glimpse into what does organized hate look like in our community?
There are multiple active groups in Jacksonville. More than one is neo-Nazi. There are 2 branches of the National Socialists. There are Proud Boys in our community. There are members of the Patriot Front in our community. They are white supremacists. There are several other hate groups that are similar. They are organized. There are hundreds in at least 2 of them. And there are many more who are listening on the sidelines and asking themselves, maybe this is for me. What their activities consist of, what we see is with the signage, with the flyering, with the banners. They are really obsessed with fitness and like paramilitary, firearms. They do trainings a lot. What I have been tracking recently, it's an alarming development, but they're becoming more apt to network amongst themselves with different groups. And the National Socialists of Florida, they have been praised by one of the largest white supremacist nexus on one of the social media platforms that they use as being one of the most willing to lend a hand to their fellow hate mongers. Historically, you see a lot of infighting in these groups, and sometimes you even see deadly violence. But some of them are starting to wise up, and that is very disturbing to see, because if they group together, that's when it gets really scary. When they're all fractious, it's terrible. But when they're working together towards what they view as a common cause, because the reason we're all in this room is because they have what they view as a common cause, and it's not just racist against Black people, it's not just Islamophobic or anti-Semitic or homophobic or transphobic. It is each of those things, and it is all of them together. And we're also seeing that is trickling into our politics, into our political system, into our school system. And it's growing, folks. I'm sorry to say that, but it is.
Thank you. That kind of truth telling. Like, we've got to look at it, right? Like, we have to look at the wretchedness so that we know better how to respond. Because just as those groups are finding they can be more powerful and effective if they join hands, that means the opposite is also true, right? It's these wedges that get put between groups, and when there's infighting in groups, right, that we sort of lose power. But when we can sort of collect each other up, we can gain it. So, but I appreciate that. Claire and I talk about this fairly often, just because she really does know so much about it. And I'll be really brief with this, but I serve as a peacekeeper, and we've got some fellow peacekeepers in the room. We try to hold safe space when people are advocating for and in the streets fighting for their rights. And There was a particular weekend where we were providing safe space at a restaurant in San Marco where they were going to have a drag performance. And we knew that the hate chatter had been high. Like we had been told that there was some concern. And so the peacekeepers showed up. And in that one little corner in San Marco, one little corner, on a Sunday afternoon, it was a JAG game, a home JAG game. There were about 60 Proud Boys that showed up. There was the neo-Nazi group that showed up. There were a couple Patriot Front people who showed up. And then at the same time, the Confederate flag flew overhead to show itself at the football game. And we looked at each other. Well, I won't tell you what we said. This is being recorded. But it really was very telling, right? And you know, families just wanted to go have a taco and watch some sort of fun, high-energy performance, you know, on a Sunday afternoon. But the forces were out, and they were showing up together, which was sort of new for us, sort of new. Dr. JASMYN.
Yeah, to hear, like I've been feeling that, but to hear you say it with so much definitiveness, like that's scary. So I am a Black, cisgender, able-bodied, middle-aged, slightly overweight, I'd like to think, man, trying to navigate and negotiate life in Jacksonville, Florida. So for me, hate shows up in many different ways, and most of the time it's more covert than overt. So I am an educator by nature and by trade. And, you know, in academia, there's this term called epistemology. How we come to know what we know that we know what we know, right? Study of knowledge. And whenever you are limiting, whenever you are filtering information that anybody can consume, you know, in my mind, that's a different type of violence. It's epistemological violence, right? So hate can manifest itself, you know, in that way. When we're looking at marginalized and disenfranchised neighborhoods, when it comes to healthcare, we know what equity looks like. We know what equality looks like. We all want that for ourselves and our families, right? But we got to want that for other. And it can be done. So the absence of equity, equality, and justice, you know, it can manifest itself in that way. The opportunity to earn a living, like just socioeconomic status. Navigating and negotiating professional in America is, for me, probably the most arduous thing I've ever done in my life. Because I have to spend so much time and effort trying to convince someone that I'm just equal to. And in my mind, I'm so much better than.
Not just in your mind, but in the real world.
So I'm saying tapping in and accessing information, resources, relationships, and opportunities for a livelihood that can feed my family is tough. Now, I gave you those identity markers, right? And I'm married to him. So when Rudy walks into a room, like he has to understand, all right, am I supposed to be the thermometer or the thermostat? And I got to be socially perceptive enough to understand the temperature of the room, and I got to be behaviorally flexible enough to make those adjustments. I can't just walk in that room and be Rudy. And I think hate can manifest itself in that way, where these systems are so filled with rigidity that they aren't able to house Rudy.
Mm.
Rudy has to be somebody else in order to be. Right? So when I think about hate, hope you mentioned insidious, right? Yeah, it shows up. It shows up in ways that that are willfully ignorant and blindly obedient. I'm gonna say that again. Willful ignorance and blind obedience. I don't even want to know what I don't know.
Mm.
And I'm not going to critically think about what somebody's telling me to do. And having to work in spaces where you are constantly trying to convince somebody to entertain a different thought, to listen to a different belief, to imagine a different feeling, and even consider a different value. It's unfair.
Right. So at the heart of so much of this is simply this idea of othering, right? I mean, we often talk about these things as being sort of large. We talk about the physical side of the violence, right? But we forget that we actually all play a role in either creating that space where equity and justice are what gets centered, or we are willing to be in spaces where that isn't present, which then allows for the fertile ground for hate to drop its seeds, right? So I appreciate that, all that honesty. So I just want to remind everybody who's with us, if you are coming up with questions that you want to ask, make sure you write them down on those cards. And in fact, for the next minute or so, if you already have one filled out, pass it towards the aisle. We have somebody who's going to go ahead and start picking up the first round of those, because we really want to get your questions into this mix. That's why we're here, right? Otherwise, you could just tap into a great video of any one of these brilliant people, but we want to make sure we're responding to the things that you want to hear addressed. So while that's happening, I'm going to ask each of you one more question, and then we're going to start taking the audience questions. And this question is about the repair side, right? So we've talked a lot about hate. And it's important that we begin to talk about, like, how do we resist it? And how do we repair the wounds of it, which are both historic and present with us? So I want to ask each of you, because I think this will probably come up in some of our Q&A, but I want to ask you each for an example of something that you think is worthy of our attention when it comes to what repair and resistance can look like, right? It can be an example of something you've been directly engaged in, an experience that you've had, something that you've witnessed others do in community. So this is where everybody needs to be like, because everybody wants to say, but what do we do? What do we do, right? The fact is we need to do a lot. And the fact is we need a lot of people doing it, right? So if you can each give us an example, and Morris, I'm going to put you a bit on the spot, because I actually think Morris did one of the most powerful means of resistance that I have seen in our community. And it's actually twofold. It's you going out into community with your story, and I want you to share about that, including the icky stuff, and the monument, the building of the memorial. That is an act of resistance and repair, in my opinion. So you want to talk a little bit about it?
Yeah, well, after my mother passed away, I noticed how fast the generation disappears during the Holocaust. So I start talking, speaking in any school or any church or anybody who invited me, I spoke over there about the Holocaust. But then it came to a point, I realized I'm not going to be here forever. And there's not going to be soon, there won't be any witnesses. What happened to continue talking about it? So it came to me to have a memorial put up. This way, we can teach the students, children, and also young adults. Today, I would say 80% of the youngsters have no clue what happened. So I thought to put it up so not only it will teach, so schools can come here and learn about what happened, and it's like, so to speak, it's on written on stone, so it will, hopefully it will last for a while, for a long while. So that was my mission, and sure enough, my dream came true, having it down here. Then I have an instance also talking about deniers. Now, one time I was invited to one of the high schools in Clay County, I'm not going to say their school, to speak over there. It was during the Holocaust Memorial Day, which is Yom HaShoah in Hebrew. So the educator, the historian educator, handed me a letter, I assume that's what it was. What it was, he had to send out a letter to the students' parents to approve for them to watch a movie. Well, not a movie really, it's a documentary about the Holocaust, what happened. So he had to ask them their approval to say yes or no, simple as that, 2 words. Well, one parent, it was a mother, as a matter of fact, she answered back.
Do you have it with you?
I have it with me.
So this was in a lead up to his visit, and then the educator shared with him this parent's response.
This will show you why I'm still talking about it, because I cannot stop. Now, she didn't just put yes or no. She added in her own writing. The question was, I do not give my child permission to view this video or sit in this class to hear it. This school should be ashamed of itself, teaching such a subject, mainly one where it did not happen, the so-called Holocaust against the Jews did not happen. It was all propaganda to feel sorry for a disgraceful group of people. Now, this is in the open. Now, we don't know how many children she still has at home, so they're hatred, and how many friends those children have. So you see how it spread. Hate can spread. Ignorance, of course. This is one of the reasons I keep talking and talking. That's the only way you can do. There's no other way. Explaining and talking about it, what happened. And hopefully it shouldn't happen again.
So Morris, people look at you and think you're this like sweet little guy, right? I mean, it's fierce, right? To have lost the majority of your family, and then you're out there in the community trying to share that truth, that personal experience, which is hard to share every time you do it. It carries such a weight. The survivors that we work with, the second gen, it carries so much weight when you have to share those stories. Like, it's a burden for people to have to go out there and share those stories. And then to get a piece of paper with that on it. But Morris is such a powerful example of turning that into fuel for his fire, right? Taking that bit of information and hate and using it as motivation to keep going. And we're just really grateful. Yeah. Yeah. Dr. Allen, give us an example.
So I'm gonna be vulnerable, right, in this moment and say, between my therapist and my pastor, I'm working on it. Because to be completely honest, in this moment, it's hard not to be bitter, right? And it's hard not to reflect on history but the parts of history that give me hope. Resistance is resilience. We haven't, for all of the history that Morris has talked about, that hope you were displaying up here, folks have persisted. Folks continue to find joy. Folks continue to fight another day, negotiating whatever salary, Rudy, you deserve. I hope you got it.
And start their families. And start their families. I mean, I think about your family as this amazing example of resilience and resistance.
Right.
Yes.
And then trying to teach my children not to become bitter. And teaching them that, these are isolated individuals, and the friends that you make are your friends, right? Like, this isn't generalized to everybody. And so trying to have them walk this balance. But the part of resistance and repair, I think that's really important. And I don't know that it gets enough attention, and Hope, you and I were talking about this earlier, is allyship. It is hard enough trying to carry this burden of the everyday lived experience and then have to educate, inform, rally and march and write and do all of those things yourself without help. And help from people who this is not their lived experience. It goes a long way to have Hope up here telling all this history up here, knowing that this isn't her personal history. This isn't the stories that you've been handed down through generations, yet you care so passionately. But there's a cost. There is an absolute cost to being an ally. And one of the things that I encourage folks around is if you are genuine about being an ally and you're genuine about helping to bring about repair, you have to be honest about what you're willing to give up. Your social capital, your friend groups, the folks who will say, I don't understand why you're doing that. Why are you talking to those folks over there? We good over here. We've been good over here. Why are you taking that extra step? The sacrifice to your body. The sacrifice to your mind. Because there is an unlearning process that when you are an ally that you go through. I don't care who you are. I don't care if you grew up in the most welcoming of environments. Society has placed some things in your mind that you don't even know are there.
Right.
And they show up in really icky ways sometimes. And we have to really do the work to unlearn that. And that is uncomfortable. Because sometimes you might have to go back to your parents and challenge them on some things that, I don't think that's right, mama. I love you, but that's not how this works. Are we willing to do some of that? Are we really willing to sit next to the folks who are sitting up here and say, yeah, I got you. And I'm going to say the thing. You don't even have to say it. You don't even have to open your mouth. I got you. Knowing that perhaps saying I got you, when you walk out the door, there are going to be folks who say, Yeah, Hope isn't cool anymore. I'm not going to donate to her organization anymore. I'm not going to, I'm not going to let my kids play with your kids anymore. Because when we think about, because y'all just came from Montgomery, when you think about the bus boycott and the fact that it was over a year where folks walked sometimes 8-10 miles one way for the bigger cause, that's not easy. It's not.
But it worked.
But it worked, right? And standing in solidarity sometimes look like my feet are going to kill me at the end of the day. But this is worth it. This person is really my neighbor. This person is really my friend. And I really believe firmly that in doing this, I will reap a bigger reward. Because truthfully, justice is like air, right? If it's polluted, just because I'm Black don't mean it's just going to be polluted for me. You breathe in the same air in this room right now. We're all going to be impacted. And if we think of justice that way, and less of like this pie that we like to talk about, like everybody don't even like pie, but that's besides the point. But if we think about it that way, I think we'd be a little bit more activated. Because the same air that I'm breathing that is polluted with hate, with bigotry, etc., is poisoning all of us. We're more likely to act on it than sit here and watch our neighbors suffocate and think it won't come to us. And so I think in the work of repair is absolutely, it requires strong allyship. It requires a sacrifice. It is risky, but it is worth it.
Claire and Rudy, I'm going to put y'all on the spot to give us a quick answer to a big question, right? But can
Sorry.
you get no? That's not about you. I want to get to that basket out there of questions. An example of what, from your perspective, Claire, an example of what repair or resistance can look like.
I'll go with resistance because it's sort of my job, right? I think resistance is naming and shaming the people that are involved in these groups. And I think it's making the people uncomfortable who are willing to turn a blind eye, particularly people in positions of power who say, well, we're not sure those were Nazis that were flying the Nazi flag, right? Make them uncomfortable, hold them accountable. And, hold accountable people who are giving money to these groups, expose how these groups are grifting off their own followers, and make them feel uncomfortable in their communities. There's a man who moved here because he was chased out of California because he thought Florida was a welcoming place for him.
Yep. He just moved here a couple months ago.
Yeah, not that long ago. And, as Florida has become something of to these people, they feel like it's a safe space for them. We're seeing our own allies who might have had a trip planned to Florida every year. They come down to Disney. They go to the beach. We have seen a significant decline in tourist revenue in Florida in the past year. And while I do feel for the businesses, these people are doing that, one, because they don't feel safe, and two, because they're standing next to people and saying, no, we will not tolerate this. So I would say, yeah, name and shame and make them uncomfortable.
Yes. Dr. Jameson?
Yeah, I'll speak to repair, right? Dr. Allen's organization 904 Forward sponsors pilgrimages to the Equal Justice Initiative in Montgomery, Alabama. If you don't know anything about it, if you haven't been, you need to go. It is incredible, right? But a group of strangers get on a bus, ride 8 to 9 hours.
We do stop for lunch.
There's this curated, shared experience that happens throughout the entire weekend, where not only are they going to visit the memorial and the museum to collectively make meaning of the content that is there. They're building community amongst themselves. And Dr. Allen and her team are extremely intentional about making sure that those groups are diverse. And by the time they get back on that bus to come home, there is a sense of solidarity that you can't even imagine. They are ready to go to war with each other and stand in solidarity across all of those borders of difference. If you haven't experienced it, it is an incredible experience. But that is repair personified, because they are going to deal with some information that is the unadulterated truth. And it elicits a lot of emotions. And you have to wrestle with some of these things. But the space is gracious and just enough where people can stand in solidarity across borders of difference and operate in that spirit of love, hope, courage, agency, and community.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you. So we have some questions that are going to be handed to me, and we're going to do these sort of, I know this is unfair, but a bit of kind of rapid enough to get through some of them. So we probably won't have all of you answer all of them. But we've got some good ones here, and some of them are actually targeted to specific people. So I'm going to start with this one, which is for Claire.
Oh.
What do the members of organized hate groups get personally from these activities? Like, why are they there?
It's a very good question, and I've spent a lot of time thinking about and looking into. They get a sense of community. They get a sense of belonging. The individuals who belong to these groups tend to fall into a very specific category. They are young white men. Some are older. We saw a man arrested today who was 48 for hanging a Nazi banner. But young white men, that's how they get into the group. They're economically disaffected. A lot of them have mental health issues. A lot of them have a history of abuse, both as experiencing it and being perpetrators of it. They feel lost and alone and left out in the cold in the world. And they're looking for something, right? And they find it with a hate group. A lot of them are radicalized online. They come across these group of guys that seem like they want to be buddies, and that's how they end up in the group. And for them, it's a brotherhood. You see some women involved. Often they are women who are in a relationship with someone, or they learned it from their parents. There is certainly is second and third generation people in this movement. But yeah, it's definitely young, white, economically disaffected, have a lot of personal issues, and they're just looking for a sense of belonging.
So when we talk about systemic change and we talk about a whole group of people that feel disenfranchised and that they don't belong anywhere, there's something basic that is also broken, right? In the households, in the broader community, right? So as well as holding individuals accountable. But I know Rudy and I talked about this when we were in Montgomery, and it came up in our group how curious we all were about, what does it look like in the community where that person from Clay County who came across the county to murder 3 of our neighbors because they were Black, like, what is that all about? Like, what's happening there to create the ground that he was able to, at 19 years old, wield that kind of hate? We have to figure that out too, right? This is a big one. How do you suggest dealing with loved ones who are clearly white supremacists without necessarily total estrangement? Woo, we're getting real. Who wants to take that one?
I mean, I guess I'm the white person, right? Tell them you don't agree with their views. Tell them why. Just make them see.
Yeah.
Let them see. I mean, these images we looked at earlier. And you know what? Don't be afraid to be estranged. If it's that serious, you know what? You don't need that in your life. And you can try, but eventually you have to take care of yourself. And maybe taking care of yourself is saying, you know what? I'm not coming to Thanksgiving this year because I'm not going to sit there and listen to racist Uncle Lewis go on his tirades anymore. I will not stand for it. I don't have an Uncle Lewis, for the record. But, you know, I mean, do your best. You know, this is something, when people get that far into it, it is very difficult to deprogram them, and you may have to accept that it will be impossible.
So education matters, to your point, exposing people to things they may not have been exposed to before. Relationship building matters, and some people are sometimes still open to that they don't even recognize it. Sometimes simply, you know, breaking bread with people who are different from you can make a difference. But I agree with Claire, and we see it a lot. Sometimes we spend a lot of time trying to win over the hearts and minds of people who are already fairly far down that path. And I don't want to say that every human being isn't redeemable, but is that where the energy needs to be? Because do we need everyone to build a just world? No, we need enough of us. We need enough of us. When will we ever live in peace? Okay, so this is an online submission, so none of you have to own that one. But wow, yes. So the world peace question came up. When will we ever live in peace?
I think, so our vision at 904 is an end to racism so all people thrive. And that is like the pinnacle of peace, right, for me. And it sounds simple, but I think our philosophy is one, if we're willing to acknowledge our history, that's the good, the bad, the ugly, all the stuff in between. If we are willing to engage in conversations about that history, our differences, our challenges, and be willing to address persistent systemic inequities. That's voting, that's showing up, that is getting rid of policies that don't make sense, that is enacting policies that do, that match the lived experience, then we can get there. That's a big oversimplification, but I think in combination, right, we do these things in one-offs, but if we put them all together, I think we get a lot closer.
Thank you. Last one, which I'm not surprised this comes up every time we host any of these programs, at least here at JFCS, we hear this a lot, whether it's a family night or a teacher night or whatever it is. How do we help our children, our future generations, be exposed to education to recognize hate in all its forms, especially in our current socio-political climate where educators are threatened simply for speaking up and out, right? When speaking truth and teaching truth becomes a felony, right? How do we make sure our children are okay?
Yeah, so the short of the long is we gotta tell the truth. We cannot examine the work of equity, equality, and justice through this static, contemporary snapshot of a view, right? There's a historical context associated with why we are where we are today. I think critical thinking is probably the most important thing. Like, you know, our kids are incessantly consuming information, teaching them to be critical of the information that they're consuming and to be able to wrestle with that in a private and in a public way. I think we all have to like self-assess where we're situated in this experiment we call America, right? And what are the implications of where we are on equity, equality, and justice, and how do we demonstrate, and move closer in proximity, to those ideas. But I think the youth are the most important group as it relates to us moving the needle and moving humanity forward. And there is no such thing as neutrality when it comes to teaching them. We got to pick a side. And we got to be honest and courageous about picking that side and develop our young people in ways that are more just. And we got to demonstrate a different type of leadership. We got to stand in solidarity across borders of difference in ways that we haven't seen before. We're operating in systems, like I said, they're extremely rigid, and they have been rigid for a long time. And changing those systems, takes a lot of work.
Well, and Rudy, I'm reminded, you and I have talked about this a lot, and I think, and you and I have experienced this together. When those systems are so rigid, right, we need to continue to work on trying to fix those. But at the same time, then we have a gap to fill.
Yep.
So if the schools are struggling with doing it, what does it look like for community to stand in that gap? What does it look like to create those spaces where truth can be told, experienced, expressed, shared amongst young people, as well as older people, and as well as intergenerationally, right? So spaces like the Holocaust Gallery, spaces that 904 Word often creates when they are bringing community together. The things like what happens on the trips to Montgomery. I mean, I think about a space that I spend a lot of time in, where it's like we can't just wring our hands that the schools are somewhat bound right now. That is the moment where historically they created freedom schools. They were like, all right, the schools are failing our kids and teaching Black history and in honoring the value of every child, then we're going to create our own school. We're going to do freedom schools. We're not only going to teach information, but we're going to teach these young people how to discern, how to advocate, right? All that goodness. So, yeah.
There's this critical theorist. His name is Jarvis Givens, and he wrote a book called Fugitive Pedagogy, and he talks about the work of Carter G. Woodson. It was during Reconstruction when Black schools were emerging, and they had one curriculum when they were together by themselves, but they had evaluators and monitors that were policing the education that was being imparted on these young people. So they had another curriculum for them, right? So it was like a clandestine school, right? Sometimes. But what we're seeing now, this isn't the first time that this has happened. And if we don't know our history, we wouldn't know what those solutions look like. So if you're worried about what's happening in education right now, Jarvis Given has some answers for you.
I don't think you should ever leave any system to fully educate your child. I just will say that flat out, because the curriculum, the material, everything is through a filter and a lens. And if you want your children to know what you want them to know, you're going to have to play an active role. It doesn't have to be a big system overhaul. It can be how many of our families want to come and bring our kids and do a field trip on a Saturday to this museum to learn about what happened here. It can be what's the, what the after school program might be doing, something that I want my child to know about their history. I don't think, let's just be honest, the education system was not created to educate our children fully, right? And so we have to come in acknowledging that that is the truth. We've come a long way from what it originally started, but it's still incomplete. And so it's our job as community, as friends, as neighbors to help fill in those gaps. And we shouldn't be looking for any system to fill that in for us.
Beautiful. Okay, so we have one quick thing we're going to do. This is just going to take a minute, and it involves all of us as we wrap this up. Actually, it's going to take 2 minutes. Because we're going to spend about 30 seconds in silence. And I want you each to think of one thing. Because I don't know about you, but I get tired of hearing that because the issues are so big, that means we can't do anything. That's not true. If we all did something where we're at with what we've got, we could change the world. So I want you to think of one thing from this conversation tonight that you will go out into the world and do. And that world can be any size. It can be here, it can be family, it can be community, it can be one thing. So 30 seconds I'm going to give you. Just think of that one thing. I want you to picture it. Now I want you to turn to somebody next to you, and you are going to speak that out loud. You're going to tell the person next to you, this is what I'm going to do. And then you're going to listen and hold space for that other person to tell you what they are going to do. All right? So it's going to get a little loud in here for a minute. And if you're not sitting right next to somebody, find somebody. I want you to share with them, what are you going to do?
I need to make sure that I have access to you.
Here's what I'm going to do.
And I'd like
I am going to figure out a way
positive,
to get more people
wow.
as it relates to
into our gallery.
Thank you. That
This
was
show.
very
So
flattering.
they can't just be
I'm
organized.
gonna remember
Right? I'm trying to
all
think
of these
about
people
what does it look like
that,
for us to
you know,
once a month
when I'm laboring.
even schedule a time where
my
both
office
you and I are
alone,
there, and we just tell the
working on this
community,
stuff,
come in,
that
come in,
it
come and have a
matters.
conversation with us and see
real
the
life.
show, because
Send me a
if people
text.
aren't part of an organized group, then they're not showing up. So that's the thing I'm leaving with tonight.
Love you.
And me being here anytime somebody needs me over here to explain,
Perfect,
I'll be here.
Go to therapy
perfect.
so that I can work.
So our goals actually match, right?
Yeah,
So
it's a chain.
woo, yes, it is a chain. It is a chain. It is a chain.
Don't look at me with tears in your eyes.
I saved my email address too.
I'm gonna send you all of my stuff now.
Okay, great. Thank you.
You
All right,
info
good
with Rudy?
people.
Okay, good. Then if Rudy has it, I have it.
Yeah. I have business cards
What's your
too.
final?
In fact, and it was
Thank you.
It's all right. They turned off my mic because we were talking. I'm going to do my teacher thing, right? I know, right? All right, y'all, let me pull everybody back together. I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. And if you were talking to somebody that you didn't already know, you need to make sure y'all exchange information, right? Because you now have an accountability partner. Here's the thing. It's one thing for us to think things. It's another thing to proclaim it in public. And that proclamation in public can simply be telling somebody else what your intentions are. And in exchange, hearing and holding that other person's intentions, right? So Morris and I, we're already dreaming and scheming up here. So I don't know what y'all are going to do, but we know what we're going to do. He called it a chain, right? Because we found overlap in the work that we want to do next. And so now we can do it with each other, right? That's a beautiful thing. All right. Thank you to you all for being here. My goodness, my goodness. Thanks to all of you. I'm going to turn it over for a quick wrap up with the amazing team that helped put this together. I think both Rachel and Eleanor are coming up here. So we're going to let y'all come up here without even waiting for us to move, if that's all right.
Good evening. I'm Rachel Sandler with the JCA. Thank you. On behalf of the JCA and the YMCA, thank you so much for attending our program tonight. A big thank you out to Jewish Family and Community Services for hosting our program, and thank you to Hope McMath for facilitating our discussion. And a special thanks to our panelists, Dr. Kimberly Allen, Dr. Rudy Jameson, Morris Bendit, and Claire Goforth. The Holocaust Gallery will be open for 30 more minutes at the conclusion of the program, and feel free to gather in the back with some food and drinks. Together Against Hate shirts will also be available for purchase in the lobby. Thank you to everyone for signing the banner. If you did not get a chance to do so, please do so on your way out to receive your decal. The banner will be traveling around with us to all of our programs.
Hey, I'm Eleanor Blair from the YMCA.
Yay!
Thank you. Our speaker series will continue. I know Adam mentioned it. It's going to go through January, and then we'll end with our Racing Against Hate at the Winston YMCA in February. Want to invite all of you to October 10th. We're going to be at the Friday Musicale in Riverside, and our guest at that time will be JASMYN. Also, we encourage you, like you did tonight, register in advance. There is limited spots there as well. So Hope mentioned several times that we have recorded this, so we will have a recording available to you. You'll hear from us again through email. So thank you so much for being with us tonight.
So go out there and build a more just world, y'all.